everybody, my name is Susan Trianos, and today we're going to be making some royal icing using my new meringue powder, Fluffnstuff. This stuff is amazing and can be purchased in Canada from learntocake.com and in the US through icingimages.com. So we're going to make some royal icing, and I'm going to show you why this one's a little bit different, and I'm going to give you some troubleshooting for royal icing, and also I have a video on dipping because I know a lot of people struggle with that too. So let's get started. We are going to be making our royal icing, and to do that we need a few things. First and foremost, we're going to need some meringue powder, and today we're going to be using my new Fluffnstuff meringue powder, and I'm going to tell you why this stuff is so great. It's gluten-free, it is peanut-free, tree nut-free, it is kosher, and you also require less product to make the same amount of icing as pretty much all the meringue powders out there on the market. So typically, meringue powder, you would use 3 tablespoons of meringue powder for every pound of sugar, and you're using 1/3 less for this one, and it's 2 tablespoons per pound. So that is really great. It's going to help you stretch your dollar. Okay, another thing that we're going to need is some powdered sugar. I have 2 pounds here because I'm going to make a double batch. I have a paddle attachment, very important when making royal icing. I find using a whip incorporates too much air and gives you too many air bubbles and makes your icing spongy. I have some water. I have some extra powdered sugar here in a bowl in case we need to adjust our recipe, which I'll explain as we go. I have a little hand whisk here. You can use your mixer whisk, but I like to use this, and then it saves me from switching attachments in my bowl. And a tablespoon measure, and of course your mixer. Okay, I've got a KitchenAid here. I also have an Anchor Scrum mixer, which works very well. You can use your Bosch, whatever, but you want to use a paddle attachment, something that's very gentle. Okay. So let's get started. So here's my bowl. Another very important thing when making royal icing, not only using a paddle versus a whip, is that all of your tools are super grease-free. I mean, like squeaky clean. So you can hear it's very clean. My paddle is clean. My whip or my whisk is super grease-free. Everything that touches my icing needs to be grease-free. If any grease is incorporated into your icing, it will basically destroy your icing. It won't get fluffy, it will be heavy, and it won't really dry properly either. Okay, so I'm doing 2 pounds here, so I mentioned earlier that you need 2 tablespoons for every pound of powdered sugar that you use. Here in Canada, we call it icing sugar, so it's hard for me to remember to call it powdered sugar. So because I'm using 2 pounds of sugar and it's 2 tablespoons per pound, I'm going to need 4 tablespoons of meringue powder. So let's get that measured into our bowl. Okay, and to every pound of powdered sugar and every 2 tablespoons of meringue powder, we need 5 to 6 tablespoons of water. So I always start with 5, and I can add more later if I need to. So I have 2 batches going here, and each batch of 1 pound of powdered sugar is 5 tablespoons, but I'm doing 2, so I'm going to need 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is room temperature water. You know, some recipes call for warm water. I don't really think it matters very much, but I just use room temperature water. So I'm going to give this a little bit of a whisk, not too aggressively. The purpose of this is just to get all of the meringue powder incorporated into my water and to let the water sort of dissolve any sugars that are in the meringue powder. and that's going to prevent any grit in your icing. Now, powdered sugar itself has a bit of a grit to it. My friends in the US are very lucky because your powdered sugar is a finer grain than ours. It's more powdery. In Canada, ours is 6X, and in the US, it is 10X. So, lucky for you. So there we go. I have dissolved the sugars in the meringue powder. My meringue is a little frothy. Next step is to add our sugar. So I have 2 pounds here that I'm going to add. So let's just dump the rest in there. There's our 2 pounds. And let's get this on the mixer. Okay, I've got my squeaky clean paddle. I'm gonna put it in my sugar and meringue powder mixture. I'm gonna move my mixer over so that you can see. And I'm gonna get this on my mixer. There's something very important here. Not only the squeaky clean tools, not only the paddle, but the speed of our mixer. You want to make sure you keep your icing at a lower speed when mixing, because when you whip at too high of a speed, you're going to incorporate a lot of air and very quickly, which can cause your icing to be super air bubbly and over whipped. And when that happens, you've destroyed your icing. There's no bringing it back. We're going to start this on low speed, which is stir on my mixer. And we're going to take a peek and see what this looks like with the 5 tablespoons per pound of sugar. Ideally, we want this to be about the consistency of peanut butter. If it is too loose and a lot runnier than peanut butter, then I just add more powdered sugar, a tablespoon at a time, to thicken it up until it gets to that consistency. And no need to adjust your amount of meringue powder. These are just very minimal amounts that we're adding. And if you find that your icing is too thick and a lot thicker than peanut butter, you're gonna add some water to it, just a couple drops at a time until you get that peanut butter consistency, okay? So I'm going to turn this back on. Low and slow is the trick here. So yeah, we're gonna let it go probably 5 to 7 minutes. Maybe you might need 10 to get it nice and white and fluffy. Oh, also, speaking of white, this meringue powder is titanium dioxide free, so that is a huge bonus. I mean, a lot of people add some white coloring to their royal icing. They find that it helps with color bleed and things like that. I don't feel it really makes a difference. But I would prefer to have that your choice, whether you add the titanium dioxide, which is white food coloring, to your royal icing, okay? So that's your choice. I tend to not put it in. I don't find I have issues with color bleed. I think color bleed most often happens when you're in a super humid climate or if your icings are oversaturated with color. But that's for another video. Okay, so your climate. Your climate also will determine how much water you need to add to your mix. You know, for instance, today, 5 tablespoons of water was perfect. The other day, it was raining here. There was a lot of moisture in the air, and 5 tablespoons was a little too much. So I had to add a couple of tablespoons of powdered sugar. And those adjustments are completely normal. And royal icing, honestly, your water amounts that you add are totally dependent on your environment and what it's like outside. So be patient with yourself. You can see already we're starting to get some air incorporated in here. I'm losing some of that gloss that when I first started mixing it. I'm going to turn it back on to stir. And the highest I go when mixing royal icing on my KitchenAid mixer is from stir to 2. Anything higher than that, and you risk incorporating too many air bubbles. It's better to have small, tiny air bubbles that are incorporated into your icing slowly versus really big air bubbles, and that happens when your speed is too high. So nice small air bubbles, because that's what we're incorporating here. We want air bubbles to make nice fluffy icing, but we don't want huge, spongy, massive air bubbles that are incorporated using a whip attachment versus the paddle or with too much speed. Okay, so I'm going to let this go for about 5 to 7 minutes, and we're going to come back and see how we're doing, and I'm going to tell you how you can store this. I'm also going to keep the video going, and I'm going to speed the camera up, and it's going to look like I'm really whipping the heck out of this icing. I'm not. Video's been sped up just so that you don't sit here for 5 to 7 minutes bored. So I'm keeping my machine at speed 2 or on stir. Okay, we are probably at about the 4-minute mark. Let's take a look and see what we've got. I have some beautifully creamy white royal icing. It's ready to go. I'm going to put it back on the mixer though, just for a couple more minutes, just for a bit more volume. And then I'll show you how we store this. I also wanted to mention that it's a good idea, if your paddle doesn't really reach the sides or the very bottom of your bowl, to give this a good scrape with a grease-free scraper, just to incorporate any of the thick royal icing that might be stuck to the bowl that hasn't been incorporated, and it's kind of like, feels like really thick mud. You want to just scrape that out and get it incorporated into your icing, so that all of your icing in the bowl is usable and beautiful. Okay, we're at 7 minutes, and I'm going to stop my icing from mixing. And how to know when your icing is ready? Well, do you see here how there's a big ball of royal icing that's sort of starting to collect in the middle of my paddle here? You can see it right here. That is a good sign that your icing is ready. Also too, it's not doing it in this bowl because I'm mixing a 2-pound batch in a very large mixing bowl. This is a 6-quart. If you had a 5-quart and you did a 2-pound batch, the icing would start to climb up the side of the bowl and kind of collect in a ring around the top. But just a nice collection of royal icing in the middle of that paddle. You can see this circle here, like I said, going around, and that's a good indicator. You don't want to over whip your icing. If you over whip your icing, it's going to have tons of those huge air bubbles and will be very spongy. Another thing with royal icing too is as it sits, it tends to, all those little air bubbles collect and make big air bubbles, and you don't want that. So if you're using full strength or stiff royal icing and you're piping flowers, let's say, or something decorative that holds its shape, you want to put it back on the mixer every 15 or 20 minutes or so, just to break up all those big air bubbles that have formed and create tiny little beautiful air bubbles again, so that what you make is the best it can be. Okay, so I'm going to take this off the mixer and show you what I've got here. So here we have it. We've got some beautiful, thick, stiff peak royal icing. It's beautiful. I'm gonna knock that off the paddle. You can see it stands straight up on its own. This is called stiff peak. I'm going to be doing another video, and be sure to watch it, on how to turn this icing into flooding icing, or dipping icing, sorry, making it the consistency for dip, and how I deal with air bubbles and things like that. But for now, let's talk about storing this and what we do with it while we're working, and to keep it from drying out. So here we have our royal icing. And if I'm working and I'm going to be using royal icing throughout my day, I take a damp towel and I just cover the bowl like this. Now, while you're working, sometimes you get carried away and you forget that every once in a while you have to re-dampen your towel because it dries out throughout the day, and I sometimes forget. So I get little shower caps from the dollar store and I put that over my bowl with the damp towel, and that way I don't have to worry about this towel drying out while I'm working. This is how I store it for when I'm working on projects, and sometimes even overnight if I know that I'm going to continue with my work the next day. If I'm finished my project, any leftover royal icing, I like to put into a glass bowl. Don't mind the Halloween motif. It's my favorite season. These ones are made by Pyrex, but it's just basically a glass bowl. They come in all different sizes. This one I think holds 4 cups. And I put the lid on. I let any air escape. And I store this in my refrigerator, and you're good for a couple of weeks in the refrigerator. You can also freeze your royal icing. I like to put it in a Ziploc bag. Actually, these containers freeze well too, but I put it in a Ziploc bag, I date it, and you're good for about 3 months in the freezer. Okay, so have fun. Don't be afraid of royal icing, and be sure to watch my video on dipping cookies, because you know, they're they're a struggle for a lot of people. So thank you for watching, and I hope you love this product as much as I do, and we'll see you soon.